1979, you had a near-death experience when you suffered a miscarriage. Can you tell me how that happened? Well, my husband and I were on a trip with our local choral community, and I was 3 months pregnant at the time, and all of a sudden I had a fall and began bleeding. Whereupon I was taken to a hospital where the relevant examinations were done, and I was delighted that the baby was still alive. But I had to stay there in hospital, bed rest, 4 weeks, and yet it came about that I felt labor pains in the night. And so I rang for the nurse, and then it somehow just went back and forth until I was brought into the delivery room. And I really wanted to keep the baby, and I thought they could help me with that. So I was put on an IV and was told I was on a labor drip, but I wanted to keep the baby. But I couldn't move away either, and I didn't understand at all what was going on. And then I kept saying to the baby, "Stay inside me, stay inside me." And the baby stayed inside my body. And that went on for quite a while until finally the labor drip was taken off, so that I thought that they were now going to examine me again. But thereupon, something completely different happened. One of the midwives held me by my shoulders, while the other one climbed up onto my bed and knelt on my belly. And the third one was trying to pull the baby out from the uterus. It was really horrible. For me, it all felt like a torture chamber. And they had big problems to get the baby that way, so that this went on for quite a while. And as for me, I found myself in a shoreless sea of pain. And then something happened that I had never experienced before, and that is my consciousness somehow started to split, so that on one level, let me say, I experienced what was a horror for me. And I also felt the pain and everything else involved. And on a higher level, there was a calm, a peace, and I was able to think more clearly than ever before. Did you also experience the pain in this state? On the one level, I experienced this pain and everything bad, and on the other level, I did not. And strangely enough, I still experienced both at the same time. Normally, that doesn't happen at all, I think. But in this state, it happened indeed. But unfortunately, it didn't last that long, because at some point I was back on the lower level. And at some point, they finally had pulled the baby out. But then the whole drama went on, and they tried to get the placenta. But they didn't get it very quickly. And, well, I don't want to describe it exactly, but they couldn't get the placenta out of my body. And therefore they said, "So now we will have to wake up the surgical team." And I looked at the clock. It was 1:30 in the morning when I was taken to the surgery room. And it was all so bad that I just hoped that the anesthesia would start working soon as possible so that this excruciating pain would stop. And of course, the doctors weren't too thrilled that they were woken up in the night, and I felt very clearly their displeasure. Then, all of a sudden, I saw the surgery room from above. The doctors who were there, and me, but that only lasted about 30 seconds. And then, I have to say, I don't remember exactly what happened next. So I can only tell you what I experienced at individual stages. But I don't remember the temporal sequence. But what was very, very impressive for me was that I suddenly saw my film of life wafting in front of me. Not in the form of moving pictures, as in a film, but as if a film was being pulled out of a camera, then resulting in many, many still pictures. And above some of the pictures, there was a small flame, like a candle flame. And what a strange phenomenon that was. Although I was looking ahead to my film of life, I also saw what was behind me. And there was a very beautiful spiritual being standing behind me on the left. I'd say like you might imagine angels to be, but it didn't have wings. It was wearing a long white robe, and its hair was wavy and stretched down to its shoulders. And this being was male. He looked very serious and also had a certain respect-inspiring effect on me. And for this reason, I didn't dare to ask him what these little flames meant. And as I was looking at the film of life, it suddenly went boom, and it fell down like gray dust, just lying there, like dust. Only the pictures with the flames above were still there. And then I got an unbelievable shock, and suddenly deep sadness overcame me, because I had the feeling that my life was probably nothing, that it had no value. And I didn't understand all that at all, because that I hadn't done anything bad, and that I actually had led a normal life. I was even brought up as a Christian. I joined the Christian community, and already back then, I even believed very intensively in God and in Jesus Christ, and I had wonderful experiences with him. And now there was hardly anything left, you see? And out of that shock, I asked him behind me, well, what does all of this finally mean? And I will never forget these words. He said, all the things you loved from the heart, selflessly, uncalculatingly, devotedly, self-sacrificingly, out of love, and where you simply gave and also forgave, you can bring all that with you into eternity, because that is what will endure. And may I tell you very frankly, if that was 10%, then it was a lot, but it was rather less. And thereupon, images arose in my mind, scenes, most of which I had forgotten, but some of them, actually only a few of them, have remained in my memory. But most of these images that I still remember gave me the impression that they somehow have one thing in common, and that is, on earth, everyone would have agreed with me. They would have said, yes, you made the right decision, and you behaved well, and so on. But over there, let me say, in the light of eternity, where the only thing that counts is whether something is true heart love or not, this presented itself completely different. And one scene that has remained very clearly in my memory, probably because it also has its meaning up to my present life, was that I saw that I had been a vegetarian since I was a child. And the people around me were pretty much all meat eaters. And there were often disagreements, therefore, where I said, oh, the poor animals, it's not right that you kill them to eat their meat. And I got a bit upset. We didn't shout at each other, but certainly I wasn't at peace with myself and the people around me. And that's just how tensions arose. They weren't that strong, but notwithstanding, they were disturbing. And it now was quite interesting how this was being regarded over there, because I was told quite clearly that it is far better not to eat meat. But because my objections did not imply the needed love, but I rather got upset, I had violated the law of love, peace, and harmony. And there were also some scenes that I became aware of again, and where I felt incredibly sorry for everything. And I have to say, out of this experience, there is no worse pain than the pain of remorse. And I felt so intensely, much worse than on earth, because over there, I, in general, experienced everything much more intensely in this state of being. To me, the body seems like a kind of buffer, whereby the emotions that we have on earth do have their intensity, but over there were experienced much more immediately, both the beautiful sensations and the painful ones. And actually, all I wanted to do then was to go back to earth because I simply wanted to make up for everything. Well, now something else comes to my mind that is very important. Namely, I saw that the sorrowful times, when I had either suffered physically or simply times that were not so easy, when I also had suffered mentally, that over there, those times were totally precious. They seemed to me, let me say, like precious gems. They were really precious. And the beautiful days we all love so much, so lighthearted, full of joy, and so on, it's all okay, it's very nice. But those days seem to me like costume jewelry that just looks beautiful, but is lacking in substance. And what really calmed me down somehow was that everything had a deep meaning. And this is calming me down very much, even today. And the difficult times especially, that nothing ever happened by chance, but everything was ordered, and it had to be that way. How old were you when you had this miscarriage and this near-death experience? I was 21. And the film of life, did it start in your childhood and continued until you were 21? I had the impression that it was like that, but I hadn't had the time to look thoroughly at every single one of these images. I rather perceived the film of life in an all-encompassing perspective, and it was already infinitely long at the age of 21. Well, I didn't have the time to be able to process each individual image in detail, only what has presented itself to me occasionally. But basically, I only perceived the meaningfulness of the pictures, above which the flames were burning, in a way that I had gone through such mysteries of life emanating from these pictures with true warmness of heart, situations in which I had given of myself, really loving from my heart, and even if in some situations, let's say, or as the saying goes on earth, where I missed out. You have seen the life film and have communicated with the spirit being. How did it continue afterwards? Well, thereupon, something very beautiful happened, and that was that I found myself on a very peaceful, very beautiful, light-filled level or sphere, which looked like a particularly beautiful nature site here on Earth, with the only difference that all things over there were more enchanting, and there are also distances. But the way I experienced it, these distances were of a nature that when I looked very, very far out, I still saw everything in sharp focus, like through a magnifying glass, just if I wanted to. And there was also a spirit being or a departed soul that I perceived at a certain distance. And I realized that it was exposed to the same phenomenon as I was. And that is that before I could say something, what I thought or what I felt, it already came out of the heart area, out of the stomach area. Nowadays, I would say out of the solar plexus, in wonderful colors, forms, like waves, like rays, in the form of sounds, in the form of melodies, out of my being. And in this way, it then continued to vibrate. It's very difficult to explain, but it all was looking so beautiful, as did what was emanating from this spirit being. And I realized that up there, you couldn't pretend at all, that you couldn't lie at all, even if you wanted to. And in this sphere, it probably wouldn't be possible at all. You are like an open book. Everything is there. And you know exactly, as one says on earth, whose spirit child the other is. Well, and now I realize that these colors, these vibrancies, these shapes, and these wonderful melodies were coming from the grass, from the flowers, the trees, from the animals. The latter I didn't see, but I knew that they too are emanating this. Just out of everything, really out of everything, came these colors, these vibrancies, these shapes, and these wonderful melodies. It's probably hard to imagine. The best thing I could compare it with on earth is a marvelous fireworks display, but without having this bang effect. But instead of creating a beautiful symphony and everything fitting together there was no disharmony, no discord, even the colors, everything was harmonizing. It was just so beautiful. I would have loved to stay there, but somehow it suddenly ended, and I was drawn somewhere else. You spoke of some beautiful surroundings. Is it possible for you to compare it with something similar? Since I grew up in the eastern part of Germany, I didn't have the possibility to travel around the world that much because the borders were mostly closed. And if you look at it on the internet, well, here in the Black Forest, it's nice too. Beautiful meadows, beautiful hills, simply very, very lush vegetation. And you have also seen forests. Well, I didn't see very dense forest, but I did see trees. It was more like an open landscape where there was a tree here and a tree there, and in between some hills, the meadows with various flowers. You said you were drawn to another place afterwards. What happened next? Well, the next scene was that I found myself inside a fog full of light, like you see on Earth just before the sun breaks through. And I was floating along, and I felt like I had only just awakened, like life on Earth had been a dream. And now I was totally present, and I could think much more clearly again, and I had more strength. And I was full of joy. I just felt great. Everything was fine. But my life on earth, it seemed to me like it was running behind a wall of fog. Not that it wasn't important. It seemed to be an exam, a course, but still as if I was fully present in earthly life as I was over there. If I compare it, and I was just drifting along, and everything was fine. And I knew that I didn't know, but I knew for sure that if I kept drifting along like this, I would get to a place from which many different colored paths started. So the white path led upwards to Christ. And then everything else, or the others, were light yellow, then yellow, and then it became more and more colorful, and then darker, 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 all the way down. And I had the feeling that I was about to leave this wall of fog so that I would be in this place. And here I have to say that years later, I read a book entitled Journey into Immortality. And in this book, this wall of fog was described. This place, that is, this place with these paths, where you are then inevitably drawn according to the law of resonance, depending on your character or vibrancy, precisely onto the corresponding path, having the corresponding color, then leading into the corresponding spheres, spheres you have an affinity with and where you fit in. But I didn't know the book at that time. Anyway, just before I thought I could get out of the wall of fog, I heard a very clear, loud voice asking, "Would you like to stay here? Or would you like to go back?" And at that moment, I was no longer aware that I actually had decided to go back in order to make amends for everything and make everything better. Therefore, my first reaction was, "Oh, I would like to go back to heaven." And that all was going on in the night from Saturday to Sunday. And I then remembered my husband. My husband had visited me on Saturday, and we had said our goodbyes, for the first time hoping that we would be able to save the baby. And I thought to myself, when he now comes on Sunday at visiting time, and not only the baby is gone, but his wife has also died, he will go crazy. So the only thing was, no, you have to go back. And I now no longer heard a voice or anything further, but I felt a very strong suction, like the one of a vacuum cleaner, pulling me back at tremendous speed. And I flew through space, seeing Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, and, well, for the sake of honesty, I have to say that I previously had read a book that dealt with planets. So I'm not sure whether I experienced this for real or whether anything I read in the book intertwined with my experience. But actually, I think it was like that because it went on without stopping. I was flying through space and I found it totally interesting. And I thought, oh, that you still get to experience this. And I wondered why I didn't freeze, because I didn't have anything to wrap myself in. And I had the idea that it was freezing cold in space. And then I hit the Earth's atmosphere. I somehow felt it. It could be compared with feeling when jumping from the land into the water. The difference now, however, was much more perceptible. And then something slowed down a bit. I'd say my airspeed, but still it was pretty fast. So I was flying about 20 yards above the Earth's surface and came to a Congress hall that was almost all glass and had a sloping roof. And I just flew through it, through the glass, realizing that there was probably a break at that moment, so that in any case there were some people standing there. The majority of them were men, and they were talking to each other quite animatedly, and they found everything they said quite important. I hadn't learned English at school, and I don't understand English with my earthly consciousness, but strangely enough, I understood what they were saying. But I can't repeat it now, but I thought, oh, how trivial. Considering that you come from the hereafter, being aware of that which is really important in life, what really counts and remains. And so I thought, what nonsense, get me out of here. Whereupon I felt this suction again. Immediately this suction came again and pulled me away, and I flew over a fairground. And actually, I love to go to these fairs because I love to have a ride on the merry-go-round. But now I saw life in a new way. There was a terrible noise coming up from the merry-go-rounds, from the shooting galleries. And when I was filled with great compassion when seeing the people down there, because some thoughts came to my mind, like, my goodness, they don't seem to know true life. That is much more beautiful, actually, and they're looking for some kind of substitute in some earthly pleasures. And this noise, I could hardly stand it. It was so much in contrast to this wonderful symphony that I had heard over there. And so I thought again, oh, just get me away from here. And immediately this pull came again, so I continued flying, and then whoosh through the window of the hospital. And it was so beautiful again then. I was floating in a way horizontally close to my body, and there was a silence. I don't think that there is any silence of this kind on earth. There was such a deep silence, such a deep peace. I felt sheltered, that everything was fine. I felt good. And then all of a sudden, bang, I was back in my body. And from this moment on, that horrible pain started again. I was still on the drip, but I was back. What impact did that particular experience have on your future life? Well, first, I hardly felt any effects. The near-death experience was practically covered over by the physical, but also by mental pain, because I had lost a child, and that was my second miscarriage. And the few people I had told about it, they couldn't do anything with it either. And as for me, I had never heard anything similar before, not even in a modified form. I knew that I had experienced something very special at that time, but I couldn't place this. And so I put it aside for the time being and just left it there. But in retrospect, I think it has already been working in me all the time. And if I remember correctly, there came a point when I became more aware of it all. And this was just when I got this book, Journey to Immortality. Then reading what I had experienced, that things like that really exist, the wall of fog and the paths. May I say, this book is by James Lee. Yes, exactly. Whereupon I got goose pimples again and thought, oh, you had already advanced that far, because once you are through the wall of fog, there's no way back. So I got more and more involved with this issue, and the more a vividness came over me in doing so, the more I began to live more consciously. And today, being faced with a decision, or when thinking about how I am going to behave now, I try to put myself in the shoes of that situation back then. And then I ask myself, how will I see this once from over there? How will I judge it from over there? What motivation do I have? Or will I be sorry again? Will the pain of remorse come back? Because I may have failed to do the good, or maybe because I missed decisive opportunities I was offered. And this approach helps me a lot in my decisions. And this love that the spirit being had spoken about, it didn't just refer to my family and to the people you love, but it was very clear that this is affecting all of creation, the animals, the plants, what we call environment. And as I said, I was vegetarian from childhood. But what then became very important in my life was that I became a vegan, because I simply could no longer, and still today, can no longer reconcile it with my conscience that animals suffer for me, no matter what animal product it is. I have dealt with it for a long time, and I want to say that almost without exception, animal suffering is associated with it, and that has nothing to do with love, does it? And yes, it also had an impact on many little things in everyday life. For example, on the plants as well, that I don't just put myself in the animal's shoes, but also in the plant's shoes. For example, when I go shopping in the supermarket, as I did recently, and I see a plant with drooping leaves because it just didn't get water, then I go to the saleswoman and say, "Can you please water that plant?" Or I take the earthworms and snails off the street so that they don't dry out. or that someone runs over them, or something like that. Well, just things like that. Can it be said that you have become much more sensitive? Yes, in any case, definitely. And it is also very comforting for me that I was able to take the knowledge with me. That suffering is also very important. And this also helps me to accept suffering more readily. And if something should happen that I don't understand, something that I don't like at all, then I used to say to myself, who knows what deep meaning that has? Because I was allowed to gain this trust that over there I recognized that it had meaning. It was precious, in particular, these difficult experiences. And what is also very important and a great relief for me, for example, these are differences of opinion. One says, it was like this. And I say, no, you said that. And then the other replies, no, it was like I say. And then it goes back and forth. And I can then say, well, we don't have to argue because everything is recorded anyway. And that's why I can leave it at that without getting upset. Because I know it was filmed. But not only my words and my actions visible to the outside world, but my attitude, my feeling, and my sensation about it. Also, my motivation. Why did I say or do something, or refrain from doing something? And so I am completely calm, thereby keeping peace, and I also make sure, as I did when it was about eating meat, that I communicate my views more lovingly, and not in an opinionated way, but in a way that I keep the peace within myself. I have to admit, however, that the good intentions I had over there still burst far too often like a kind of soap bubble here in everyday life. But I then hold myself back as I am aware that I'm in the process of learning. Maria, when thinking back, what is the most important lesson you can take from this experience? Well, in retrospect, I have to say that I am very, very grateful that I was allowed to have this experience, as painful as it was with the miscarriage. And I consider it a great grace that I was allowed so early in my life to gain insight into love as a standard for all human actions, so that as a result, I am now able to live more consciously, thereby also gaining this trust and this certainty that everything has a profound meaning and is serving us for the best, ultimately serving us for our best, and should bring us forward, upwards, closer to God. Maria, thank you for the interview, and I thank you with all my heart.